This is an audiobook preview of the exciting new book, Functional Scalp Acupuncture by Anne Angeloni, now available in paperback on Amazon. Introduction. Moving the needle in the acupuncture profession. While the Huang Di Neijing Su Wen mentioned using Du 16 for headaches and GB 19 for the treatment of depression in the 1st century, scalp acupuncture as a distinct microsystem was only brought forward in the early part of the 20th century. Interestingly, in 1909, a German physician named Corbinian Brodmann introduced maps of cortical brain structure and function to the Western medical community. By 1935, Dr. Huang Shuilong in China is said to have been the first to introduce a connection between scalp acupuncture and the functions of the cerebral cortex. Astute acupuncturists in the last century continued to make the connection between needling scalp points and significant results, likely based on their knowledge of Brodmann's brain maps. For example, they found that stimulation of acupuncture points over the motor cortex is useful in stroke rehabilitation, which led to the development of standardized scalp acupuncture lines. In the 1970s, Dr. Zhao Xunfa developed scalp acupuncture not only for stroke rehabilitation, but also for Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, and musculoskeletal conditions. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, other acupuncturists, such as Zhu Mingqing, Lin Shui-Jian, and Toshikatsu Yamamoto, all developed their unique scalp acupuncture styles. By 1984, standardized scalp acupuncture lines were officially recognized by the World Health Organization as a microsystem of acupuncture. Now, 35 years later, the scalp acupuncture system continues to evolve to include more functional areas of the brain for use in clinical practice. However, we need a model that explains what is happening at the level of both the nervous and the immune systems when we perform the potent technique of scalp acupuncture. Importantly, we need protocols to improve functional brain integration for complex neuroimmune conditions, including neurobehavioral, neuropsychiatric, neurodegenerative, and autoimmune disorders. The functional scalp acupuncture model attempts to serve this purpose. The details described herein will likely become common knowledge in the acupuncture profession about 35 years from now, as it seems to be the amount of time it takes to translate current research into clinical practice. For the astute acupuncturist who wants to revolutionize their practice and start moving the needle right now, please consider using the functional scalp acupuncture model. Chapter 1. The Functional Scalp Acupuncture Model. The functional scalp acupuncture model promotes the application of neuroscience and evidence-based acupuncture research to the treatment of chronic pain, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, autoimmune, and Alzheimer's disease. Neuroscience has dramatically increased our knowledge and understanding of the underlying dysfunction in each of these conditions. As we shall soon discover, each disorder has a well-established neurobiological signature that can give us clues as to where the imbalances lie and how to improve functional brain integration. In recent years, developments in neuroscience have offered significant breakthroughs in understanding the brain chemistry and neurobiology behind the symptoms associated with neuropsychiatric, neurobehavioral, neurodegenerative, and autoimmune disorders. From a neurobiological perspective, all of these disorders stem from a functionally disconnected and therefore asynchronous brain. Notably, in all of these disorders, the root cause can, in part, be explained by the lack of top-down control from the prefrontal cortex to subcortical limbic structures. This setup creates asynchrony, where brain structures, networks, and regions can become functionally disconnected and out of sync with each other. As a result of this disconnection, learning problems, memory issues, emotional, immune, sensory, social, and behavioral dysfunctions are bound to result. In the functional scalp acupuncture model, an asynchronous brain is responsible for many of the physical, mental, emotional, and social difficulties related to the whole spectrum of neurobehavioral, neuropsychiatric, neurodegenerative, and autoimmune conditions. We can consider that they are all disorders related to cognitive, sensory, motor, and emotional regulation, where the rhythm and timing are out of sync in one or more parts of the brain. They all are also disorders where inflammation is rampant. Contemporary acupuncturists need a comprehensive program that targets the primary problems: functional disconnection and inflammation. Lack of functional connectivity plus inflammation in our patients' brains results in many of the symptoms that present in our clinics. In light of what we now know, we can start to understand all disorders as asynchronous brain structures and networks that are churning out the neurophysiology that creates symptoms. The research can help us to become more astute at identifying symptoms that signify brain asynchrony in specific receiving and processing centers. Example from the midbrain, the thalamus, the basal ganglia, the somatosensory cortex, to limbic, sensory, and cognitive integration areas such as the insular cortex, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, ventromedial PFC, and the orbitofrontal cortex. It can also help clue us in to brain network involvement, neurotransmitter imbalances, and synaptic impairment. In the FSA model, decreasing inflammation and improving the function of the prefrontal cortex, the somatosensory cortex, the motor cortex, and the association cortices, as well as supporting functional connectivity to limbic structures, leads to brain integration and resolution of symptoms. The revolutionary import is that we can now consider depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, autism, ADHD, OCD, autoimmune, and Alzheimer's disease as brain asynchrony in need of balance. In order to learn more about the brain structures and networks involved in all of these conditions, let us continue with a basic understanding of neurobiological signatures. Chapter 2: Neurobiological Signatures. Mapping neurobiological homunculi. The term neurobiology refers to the functional integration of the nervous system and the immune system. The FSA model acknowledges a bidirectional relationship between the nervous system and the immune system. Our nervous and immune systems are our primary motor and sensory processing systems. When we get curious about the underlying neurobiological basis of many of the neurobehavioral, autoimmune, and neuropsychiatric conditions, we can see how neurons, synapses, structures, networks, and neurotransmission in the brain may be dysfunctional. If there is any deficit in neural function, the result may be symptoms of cognitive dysfunction, sensory deficit, motor deficit, emotional dysregulation, as well as immune imbalance. In this writing, a neurobiological signature represents the brain structures, neural networks, neurotransmitters, and synapses that need support. We can view each signature as a homunculus of neuroimmune hotspots that can be mapped onto the brain per diagnosis. The term homunculus means little man in Latin. In the FSA model, each homunculus will be used to describe the maps of cortical, limbic, and sensory motor hotspots per diagnosis. Hotspots refer to commonly affected areas of the brain that are involved in each disorder. Each hotspot represents an important neuroimmune or psychoneuroendocrinimmune regulation area. In the FSA model, altered cognition, immunity, mood, memory, learning, and behavior are all related to issues with corticolimbic connectivity, dysregulated neurotransmission, tissue damage, decreased synaptic density, and abnormal physiological conditions. Example, lack of microcirculation, glutathione, and SOD. Fortunately, acupuncture can help correct all of these imbalances. Acupuncturists can use the FSA model to identify the various neurobiological signatures and treatment zones to help their patients' brains to become more balanced. Chapter 3: Transdiagnostic Features, Endophenotypes, and the Neurobiological Spectrum. Thanks to neuroscience, we can begin to view autoimmune disease, neurobehavioral, neuropsychiatric, and neurodegenerative disorders as stemming from the same issue: brain asynchrony and chronic inflammation. Instead of labeling all these conditions as disorders or diseases, we can view them more as emotional, social, behavioral, learning, memory, and sensory motor processing differences that fall along a neurobiological spectrum. This spectrum reflects genetic and epigenetic mechanisms, neuroinflammation, neurotransmitter imbalances, the involvement of brain networks, gut-brain immune interactions, stress, environmental insults, and the cell danger response. Complex autoimmune interactions then lead to the expression of phenotypes that we label as one particular disease or disorder. Interestingly, research involving the neurobiology of autism spectrum disorder, anxiety, depression, ADHD, OCD, schizophrenia, autoimmune disease, and Alzheimer's has led to the realization that several transdiagnostic features and endophenotypes occur across all disorders. Transdiagnostic features refer to common factors that are shared among these disorders, while endophenotypes refer to biological markers that predispose an individual to a disorder. These features and markers, along with point protocols for all of the above conditions, are described in the Functional Scalp Acupuncture book, which you can now purchase a paperback copy of on Amazon. We hope you enjoyed this audiobook preview of Functional Scalp Acupuncture. For more information about CEUs for California licensed acupuncturists, please visit AnneAngeloni.com. Thank you for listening.